Hello, everyone. I guess you're all heroes for being here at this time of day. My name is Spyros kalogeratos, and I work for Interlot, which is a global gaming and technology leader. Today, we will briefly talk about information security, why it's needed, and how you can incorporate it in your product. From what I've heard before, we're talking about products, we're talking about product teams. What I'm going to say applies both to product teams and also to engineering teams. So, I mean, pick and choose whoever wants to do with that. So, which one of you guys likes French fries? Can I see some hands? Good. Okay, so I hope you like security, and we'll see in a while why. And that is what inspired the title of my presentation. It's a question that may be asked when you're ordering from a fast food. I mean, the burger, here's the product, but what about the fries? I mean, does anybody want them? The same with security, actually. We'll see in a while. So when I was first was informed that I was going to speak to the PLG Summit, I have to admit that I was not aware of the PLG concept. So I read a bit, and I really liked the fact that it's user-centric. It's actually something that I have come across myself as a user, and also as the bad guy at Interlot, that I was chasing users not to use non-corporate applications, but applications that they like. But that's inevitable. So what I'm quoting here is not, and I see is that actually users demand better experiences from the tools they use. But what was a bit, strange to me is that I didn't see many references to security. And it's like, to me, it was like, I have the burger here. It's like ordering the burger and not getting the side fries, or even fish and chips without the chips, actually. So while the side order raises the cost a bit extra, and that may be the security, it might give some trouble to some people. It is essential. From what I've seen and what I've read, user acquisition, retention, expansion are in the epicenter of PLG. While you're looking to acquire the good guys, the paying guys, has anybody ever thought that you may be also getting users that have a malicious intent, users that want to cause harm to get the data from your application? So to me, something happened, okay, sorry. So whenever I try to use an application, I look at it, I always look at the who are we, I check when my data is hosted, the privacy policy, stuff like that. Malicious users tend to do more than that. They look under the hood. They look for any vulnerabilities using special tools that they have to check if something, a form is vulnerable, if it can be injectable. So when you're all designing, the onboarding process, your APIs, how the information is going to be exchanged or whatever, does anybody think about information security to begin with? If not, has anybody ever thought what will happen if, the information that is hosted in your applications is leaked and that's made public because somebody bypassed your security controls? Or if it's not made available and it's down, the application is down and nobody can use, then acquisition, okay, you got it, but retention and expansion will become irrelevant. And while there are some industries that have controls in place, mandatory controls, security controls in place, as the payment card industry, that may not be the case for all the products or the applications. So I don't know if you've thought to yourselves right now, up until now, if you're happy with what you've done with regard to security, and most of all, if you are secure. Before we move any further, for those of you that are not aware, information security, it's the CIA triad, not the CIA that you all know from the movies or whatever. It's about the preservation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. With confidentiality being all about keeping the information available only to those that need to have access to it. Integrity, protecting it from unintentional changes. And availability, as the word says, keeping the information available. So this is a continuous journey for security to preserve all these three tenets that we talked about. I'm going to now give you another, let's say, concept, that of the defense in depth. And you may see an onion here, but it's quite relevant because defense in depth actually has the same concept with the layers and the layered approach. So think of your product as having different layers. And if you decompose it, you have the network layer, the application, the operating system, the database where your data is held. And all these layers, they have to work in tandem for your product to be available. So the same thing should apply to the teams that are working for each layer. It's not, and information security is not a one-man, a one-team show. It's a job, and it's something that all teams should come together, the engineering teams, the network teams, the database teams, everybody. And even product teams should be aware, and they should strive for the product to become secure. Before we move any further, the number one thing for me and the number one priority is management commitment. Even if all the teams are security-oriented, you can't have information security if not management, the ones that are calling the shots, are determined to have information security, to invest in people, processes, and technology. What we're going to see in the next few slides are indicative technical and organizational controls, as you see up there, that you can introduce in your products and in order to make things more secure. So starting off with the application layer, that's the way I'm grouping the source code that you're writing on your application, which offer is an entry point for somebody, for a vulnerability of somebody that would like to take advantage of your application. So what can you do? You can secure your code and you can test your code for security. How? There are specific tools. If you see there, I'm calling SAST, which stands for Static Application Security Testing, and DAST for Dynamic Application Security Testing. Is anybody aware? Does anybody know these tools? Okay, you do. So SAST is a specific set of tools that what they actually do is they either scan your code base, depending on, on the product, they scan the whole code base, or even better, as you write your code, it's scanned for insecure, for vulnerabilities, for insecure code practices. And some tools give you hints on how you can remediate those findings. So after you're done, you have built a module or like a subproduct or whatever, and it's ready for testing, then you have DAST. It's the Dynamic Application Security Testing. These tools, what they do is they give massive input of different, different input in order to check while your application, while the module is running, if there are any vulnerabilities that were not discovered previously through the static testing. And this is not a penetration test, which is something that is a bit manual, a manual procedure mostly. This is fully automated. So you're done with your static and dynamic code analysis. It's time to fix whatever needs to be fixed. And it needs to be fixed early, before it's too expensive, in order to avoid rewriting parts of code. And that is why you should also be very careful for third-party libraries you use. Don't think that, oh, it's a third-party library, it's secure. You have to be very careful as well. So once you're done with all this testing, the next thing that you could possibly do is to perform a penetration test, a security assessment. This is offered by many companies, many platforms online, and it is, let's say, an assessment that mimics, that simulates the actions of a malicious user. So in case something is found there, it will have to be fixed. And as you're done with that, something that you can use, in the gaming industry, that was, somebody talked before that, it's very important to actually fortify your product, and there are products like the web application firewall. It's an appliance, it's a service, and what you can do actually, you can put between your application, and in case that anything that is malicious identified, any malicious interaction between a user and your application, it's stopped without breaching your application and possibly causing an exploit. Moving over to the network, the operating system, and the database, and while some of you may have outsourced this and not use your own infrastructure about everything that's on the cloud, you should still look for your providers to have what is outlined below. There are reports that you can ask and get, third-party assurance report, that's how they're called, and they actually list what they do for each of these areas. So, starting off with vulnerability assessments, tools, methods that scan all these components in order to identify outdated and vulnerable software. So once this is identified, next step is patching, security patching. Hardening the configuration. As the word suggests, hardening means making things more harder for somebody to gain access. Changing default passwords. I don't know, what about a password policy that is complex? Disabling unnecessary services, unnecessary ports. These are all things that you can do to harden your products and the infrastructure as well. Encryption in transit, encryption at rest. What does it stand for? In transit is the journey between your product with the application and the users. And at rest is where your data is resting. So that's in the database, encryption is there. Backups, encrypt the backups as well. Then, safeguarding and controlling remote access. That means that the ability for users to remotely access an application should be limited only to those that need it. And please use a VPN with two-factor authentication, something that, it's not open to anybody, to everybody. And the next step, which is interconnected, is segregate access to resources. I know and understand that everybody wants to be a super user at all the stacks, but this should not be the case. Try, if you have the available resources, to limit that to specific teams, because if an account gets compromised, then the whole infrastructure is compromised. If you only give access, for example, to a small part, then you're going to be a little bit safer, let's say. Backup and resilience. You all know the backups, right? So this is something that should be sophisticated. It's not like you have a hard drive, a USB stick, and you're happy. Or even if you're using the cloud, still in the cloud. You should have 2 and 3 different places to store your data and different versions. And resilience, when we're talking about resilience, I'm talking about high availability architecture. And last but not least, something that is overlooked, logging and monitoring in order to check if something fishy is going on, and auditing in order to establish who did what and where. This is specifically important in cases where incident management procedures kick in, and you need to see what happens, who did what, in order to avoid this from happening in the future. And something that's quite important is organizational controls. It's things that are not technical. So policies and procedures being number one. Standardization that is going to be safeguard, that's going to be enforced by policies and procedures, is something that you should definitely consider, that everybody works in a synchronized manner. What you can do is you can possibly adopt and establish management systems as a management system for quality, management system for security, ISO 9001, ISO 27001, you name it. This gives, not only does it give trust to the users of a product, stakeholder trust that is, it also gives you value, because in these systems there's auditing as well. Auditing by internal teams and auditing by external teams that give you the certificates. Auditors are our friends. They have a fresh eye, they have experience, and always it should be welcome. Next, culture and awareness, very, very important. I said before, we discussed before about secure coding. Okay, secure coding is one thing, it's very important, and technical controls are quite important as well. But what about security training in terms of your users, your employees, everybody, the whole team, identifying a social engineering attack, or identifying that an email is malicious, is phony, and they should not click on the link because then access to your infrastructure is going to somebody that doesn't know, that you don't know, and he demands any ransom, I don't know what. So it's very important because it's true that the human error is the main cause of security breaches. And last but not least, something that's quite my favorite is physical security. I hope nobody in here writes down passwords in Post-its, sticking it on their screens, or like having a fancy little notebook with a password. This is one aspect of information security. Or I've seen many people with laptops here. I don't know if you're working on laptops. Do you know who's sitting on the back of you? Do you know who is listening what you're saying when you're in public spaces, or like disclosing where you work from your lanyards? You don't know who's watching, so you should be careful. And with that, thank you very much. I hope that I gave you food for thought.
Spyro, for this presentation on
You're
security. We have two questions from the audience. So question number one, how can we integrate security in products when in some cases it may make the customer user experience worse?
Yes, that is something I didn't talk about user onboarding because many people actually that's where they focus on. There should be a balance, right? So it's not all, when as a company, as a culture, you see that security is a burden, that's what you do, and that's I think that what your product may give out as to its users. I mean, I've used application where each time that I have to log in, I just enter my username and I get a one-time password code on my email. Okay, that is not an easy thing to do, but I feel a little bit more secure with that way that even my password changes every time. So I mean, there should be, of course, a balance, but then again, it's up to what your orientation is and what you want to do. I mean, some people won't like it, but if you have a nice product, they will appreciate security.
Okay, thank you very much. And second question, the last question, would you trust ChatGPT to replace any of the tools or methodologies that you're using, like SAST, for example?
ChatGPT.
Yeah, for SAST.
I'm not aware if there's such a thing as an integration right now between ChatGPT and SAST. But there are actually companies out there that have been doing that for a long time. I would suggest to wait and see, I mean, how things work out with ChatGPT and all these tools. There's one thing that I'm not sure about. So if ChatGPT shares the data and your code base somehow for analytics, do you know what, I mean, how your code base, and which is your intellectual property in the end, how it's treated in ChatGPT? Are you, like you're giving out personal details to ChatGPT, right? Are you sure how this is all used? Or if something, you know, may be loaned back to you. So I mean, I would suggest caution for the time being and see as this whole thing about artificial intelligence, you know, grows and matures, to, you know, think it over again. But if you're saying ChatGPT versus a SAST and you don't have anything, I would go with SAST.
Okay. Thank you very much.